Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast episode number 135. This time I spoke with Richard Walker, who's now the consulting editor at the national newspaper, but was also there at the formation of the newspaper, and he was also the man most directly involved in the Sunday Herald becoming an independent supporting newspaper. We had a chat about those decisions, but also about the media picture in Scotland in general, and about some of the media controversies that we've been seeing recently. Little note before we start, this interview was recorded before Wings Over Scotland got kicked off Twitter, so there's nothing about that in it. Anyway, on to the conversation, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Richard, how's it going?
Hi, it's going very well, thanks. How is it with you?
Bit of a dodgy shoulder, but apart from that, not too bad. But I did want to say congratulations for being appointed the new campaign manager for the Conservative Party. Oh, no, wait, sorry, wrong paper, wrong editor, sorry.
Yeah, there's a few of them. There's a campaign manager for the Tory Party, and I believe there's a new appointment as communications director for the Scottish Labour Party.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. It's slightly
odd. Right, I thought you meant the other one, which Magnus Gardam, who's going to work in the Scottish office as well.
Yeah, I mean, slightly odd appointments, especially the Labour Party one. I don't know what you made of that.
Well, they need somebody, don't they? They need somebody who is charged with getting their profile higher and also to make sense of the crazy situation that they find themselves in, which becomes crazier by the day and more complicated. So I suppose somebody's got to try and devise a narrative that makes the Labour Party look something other than incredibly stupid.
And what do
Good luck to him on that.
And what do you
job.
think? And what do you think of the sort of protestations here that? Yeah, he did work for the Daily Mail, and yes, if he was the editor, maybe you can tell the listeners, but if he's the editor, surely the final say on what goes in that paper is his, and some of the things that are published in the Scottish Daily Mail, let's just say, are not of the left. But there's been kind of lots of protestations from Labour saying, well, he's not right-wing. He's not a right-wing guy. It's a disgrace to say so. I mean, right. Does that sit awkwardly with you, or could you see that?
No, I mean, he's not the editor. He wasn't the editor. He was the political editor. So that's entirely different. That would mean that he was in charge of compiling an array of stories on the political scene, which would then be presented to the editor of the newspaper, who would decide which of those he would use and probably decide what particular slant to put on certain stories. So certainly you could argue that the political stance of the newspaper wasn't necessarily the political editor's stance. So I'm not sure. I don't know whether he is a left-wing guy, a right-wing guy. I'm pretty certain he's not a pro-Indy guy, but then you need to ask him that to be sure. Generally, you would say a political editor's job, or indeed a reporter's job, is to try and put forward the facts without opinion and without necessarily skewing them to one side or the other. Now, in the days of social media and the days of Twitter, when reporters are on Twitter and commenting on things, the trouble is you now know sometimes what the reporters and political editors believe, what their opinion is on certain stories. That's a new development. I'm not 100% convinced that it's a good development.
So what did you make of the whole Stephen Daisley thing? Because it wasn't just the fact of the content he was producing for STV. I mean, some of the stuff that came on his Twitter account was quite extreme, I think. And a lot of people, not even independent supporters, not from any particular party, a lot of people were quite uncomfortable with the fact that the STV's editor, like the political editor, or political, sorry, what was the title?
Digital editor, I think, or he was digital commissioning editor. I'm not quite sure the exact title, but it was something of that nature.
And a lot of people were very uncomfortable with some of the content he was putting out there. I mean, how did you find it?
I think there was a number of different issues there. There was, I guess, split it into two issues. First of all, one is the difference between his own personal account and the STV account. I think some of the statements that he put on the STV account were debatable as well, but not as divisive and not as debatable as some of the comments he put on his own personal account. If you take not even indie stuff, if you look at his opinions that he expressed on Palestine, the opinions that he expressed on abortion, those were clearly opinions that many people would object to. Now, I think it's fair enough to express opinions that people object to, but I think there's a line that you cross over when it looks as if you're trying to annoy as many people as possible. You're trying to noise up people. And I think some of the comments he put online were designed to be that way. In terms of independents supporting things, or independents or tweets attacking independence. Some of them, to me, cross the line. I think I would like to have a debate on independence that is not abusive. Other people don't share that views. I think Brian Spanner, in particular, is an abusive commentator. He abuses people, and in particular, he says very nasty things about women. Now, I personally think that if somebody retweets that, then they do open themselves up for criticism. And reasonable people would think Brian Spanner's comments are beyond the pale, and therefore somebody who retweets those and puts them out to a wider audience is helping to spread abusive tweets. And I think that person should be criticised for that. So I think that's fair enough. Personally, I think where John Nichol and Pete Wishart made a mistake was to raise it with STV bosses, because as soon as you do that, then you open yourself up to criticism of trying to shut somebody down or trying to gag them. Now, they say at no time did they ask him to be gagged, and I believe that, of course. They did not necessarily ask the STV to stop him writing those things. But if you raise it with his bosses, you're clearly doing so with an expectation or a hope that they do something to at least dilute what he's been doing. That can only lead to accusations of potential censorship, and I don't think that's a good thing for politicians of any party to be accused of or to look as if they're trying to achieve that. So I think that was a mistake, but I think the points they raised were valid points, absolutely. I think many people, as you say, had reservations about what he was doing and reservations about whether or not somebody in his position, somebody who is supposed to be giving a wide variety of news and opinion, somebody who's supposed to be treating all sides in different debates equally, whether they should then go on Twitter or social media and make quite extreme comments in support of one side or another.
Do you think, given falling readership and falling viewership of lots of things, do you think it was just clickbait?
I don't know Stephen Daisley, so I don't know whether or not he genuinely and passionately believes the views that he put forward on social media. I don't know. I think it's quite dangerous on Twitter because you can think, right, if I tweet this, I'm going to get a certain reaction. I'm going to get more retweets. I'm going to get more profile. I'm going to have discussion, which is going to put me at the centre of it. And I think that's sometimes a bit tempting. And therefore, you need to guard against that, absolutely. And I think maybe he got carried away with what he may have thought was a sense of his own importance in the debate. I think you need to always keep yourself grounded. And I think maybe he managed to lose his bearings a little bit.
Okay, so let's move on from such jollities on to your own newspaper. I suppose the first thing I'd like to ask about the National is, what's that? You've just had 500 editions up?
500 issues, 500 editions, yes.
Yeah. And how's the project going? Readership up, readership down? Are we going well?
The project is going well. Readers are loving it, generally. I mean, as a newspaper editor, when I was working there every day, it was incredibly encouraging that you would get random phone calls from people. I mean, literally of an afternoon, the phone would ring and somebody would just be phoning up just to say, thank you for existing. Thank you for doing this paper. It's really important to us. It's really opening our eyes to certain things. And it's also great to have a newspaper that embraces the ideology that we embrace. So that was incredibly encouraging. I would like to sell more newspapers up. I would absolutely like to sell more newspapers. That would always be the case, no matter how many I was selling. I do think the movement could support it a little bit better. I think some people can take these new things for granted. I think some people take the National for granted because, remember, it wasn't always there, and it depends on its continued existence on people continuing to buy it. Now, some people buy it every day. That's brilliant. I love hearing people who buy every copy every day, or sometimes they buy more than one copy every day and they leave it in the cafe or the bus for people to read. Some people have a digital subscription and also buy the print version every day, and that's incredibly heartwarming to hear, and I'm incredibly grateful to those people who do that. So, in general, the reaction to the National has been incredibly positive, and I feel very positive towards the people who buy it. Yes, so it's a very small unhappiness, I guess, that the circulation isn't as high as I might want it to be. That's not to say it's dangerously low. It's not. It's doing very well. It's absolutely sustainable, and I'm sure it will very relatively soon print its 1000th edition and beyond. So there's no fears or axe hanging over it. But Yeah, I would like it to sell. I would like it to sell more newspapers, and I think it deserves to sell more newspapers. One of my frustrations is that particularly non-indie people will label it a comic. Now I can see why they do that because you will attack your opponents, but the National is very far from a comic because although we do stuff which is pro-indie, we also do a very good international content, which more than some other newspapers do. So I think we do serious journalism, and pro-indie journalism can be serious journalism as well. Of course it can. I mean, these are stories which other media don't give much prominence to, and we do because we see things from a certain perspective, and that perspective is shared by our readers, but it's not shared by many other newspapers in the media.
And I also believe it's quite a small team you've got at the National. One of the criticisms that's been levelled at it is that there's not so much content, it's big on photos, but is this part of this because you've got quite a small team at the moment?
No, part of it is because I like big photographs. In a designing sense, I designed the National when it started as well. So I think you need to have a certain dramatic impact with your pages, and that generally means having relatively big photographs. So that's a style I like. I don't think you could say that for 60p you're being shortchanged in terms of content. There's a lot of content there. There's a lot of news stories. There's a lot of international stories. In terms of a reporting staff, it's not up there with the levels of, I guess, the Daily Mail, but it's quite significant, the number of people that work there. They're able to cover all the major news stories, and we've got some really, really great writers there, and we've got some very good contributors as well, and we've got some very good columnists, and we pay all those people. So we do the right thing by the people who work for us, and I think we cover news for our readers very well. So I don't think that criticism of the big pictures, etc. I don't think that's really justified. I'm very proud of our editorial content, our editorial standards. It's not as big as the Times, for instance. It doesn't have the sports section that I would possibly want for it. But then you have to walk before you can run. We produce a newspaper which is sustainable in terms of the copies we sell and the advertising we bring in, and it would be rash to have a much bigger newspaper which needs far more sales and far more adverts than we currently have, because I don't want the National to close. I want it to grow. I think I want us to bring in more money, and then we can grow it in terms of what we give to our readers. I think it has to be that way around, because otherwise you put yourself in a vulnerable position, which is not wise.
No, particularly not in the current climate, and that's the thing I
Well, you
want.
see what you can see what is happening to newspapers. Although I have my own issues about how newspapers report their readership. I think in a digital age in which we currently live, to focus almost entirely on print readership and report print circulations and expect people to be able to distinguish what's actually happening is crazy. Newspapers content is now available in all sorts of different platforms. Indeed, every newspaper management puts huge amounts of focus on the digital world, and yet don't properly report their success in the digital world. And their main way of reporting their performance is through print circulations. That's just nuts. It's clearly designed to make the paper's performance look worse than it currently is. Of course, we don't sell the print copies we used to sell, but then we've spent years telling our readers, don't just read us in print, read us online, because that's available as well. So in a sense, we've been successful in that message. People now take digital subscriptions and they read our website, and in some cases, although very far from all, but in some cases, they pay to go through a paywall to do so. And those are good stories. Those are good news stories for the industry, which clearly is facing challenges, but it's not in such a perilous position as the print circulations alone would have you believe. There's another whole issue about how you can make the digital world pay and how you can make the digital world bring in enough money to sustain the newsrooms of the size that we would want. But that's a whole issue, and that's not an issue about popularity with readers. That's a business model issue.
And do you think that it is for print issues, it is a terminal decline?